All right, so if you want to join, because I will be asking some questions as well, let me just give you the join link so you don't have to type in stuff. Here's the join link for our Pear Deck, which we have not used in quite some time, but I felt it would be fun to do for a wrap up. So go ahead and click on that link to join, and I'll allow you guys a minute to do that. So basically, usually we would have another cycle for our app projects, but I don't want to spend too much time on Unit 3 since there's so much more to learn. So we're going to be skipping the peer review cycle. So usually, I'll talk about it more as we go through the slides, but we'd usually do some peer review of applications, and then you would go through another development cycle where you could improve your application based on peer feedback. But we're going to skip that for the sake of time. All right, so if you just joined, here's the link for that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start this. If you haven't joined, you can still start. What's going on, Jorge? Dylan, we can talk about that because I had been tutoring Thursdays, but most people stopped showing up because credit recovery started and it was at the same time. So I'm looking at maybe doing tutoring after 7th period. But yeah, message me if you're interested in tutoring after school and we can coordinate a time that works for everybody. Okay, so just message me on Jupiter. I'll send out a message too to remind you all. Okay, so yeah, no problem. Wrapping up Unit 3. So let's talk a little bit about this mess that I've here. So this is the software development lifecycle, and we've been secretly doing this all along. And this is actually what professional programmers do as well. There's some slight variations in how this all works, but this is a really good summary. So you start out with like an idea. You brainstorm ideas that solve a particular problem faced by, targeted users, or just, something that you want to create an application about. And then you interact with your potential users to kind of figure out what the users want, what they need to know, what they need to be able to do, etc. And then you start designing your application. Before you even start coding anything, you start, drawing out what it looks like, thinking about, in your case, what your buttons do, where they lead, etc. And so those first 3 steps are things that we started out with in the application specification, right? Back when we were working with this guy right here. So you can see that like that first stage of ideation, code.org calls that investigate and reflect, right? You brainstorm your ideas. In this step, you also interviewed classmates. Well, usually you would, but we did not, right? We skipped this part. But I want to just kind of, reiterate that usually you would be interviewing your user, in this case your classmates, during this stage. So during the ideation, or what they call the investigate and reflect phase, you would usually also be talking to the users of your application and figuring out what they need to know and what they need to do. Okay, and then the design phase, right? Back here, where they also called it design, right? You're drawing out what your application actually looks like. So we're doing stuff that real live professional programmers do, even though we're just learning, right? So that's pretty cool. And then the rest of the cycle, you started developing your application. You did this in lesson 4 when you set up your user interface, and in lesson 8 most recently when you actually coded your event handlers. You were in the development phase. Now, if we were to complete this unit, we would go on to testing, and we would have, excuse me, we would have our classmates test out our project and give us feedback and tell us maybe points of improvement that we could, add to our programs. And then you would kind of go back to this development phase and kind of like go back and forth between development and testing, and maybe even go back to requirements and design if you really needed to add some new stuff like new screens or something like that. So the idea is that when you're building software, it really is a cycle and you can bounce between these different stages. And the truth is that software is never done. Even when you go to deployment and maintenance, so deployment is when you actually ship your software, so it's publicly released. You're always in this maintenance phase where you're kind of going back and you're designing and you're developing again. So I just kind of want to go over this model since this is something that we're going to be coming back to as we learn more and more. Okay, so I just want to talk a bit about the testing phase that we are skipping. So that would have been lesson 9. And to think about testing, I kind of want you to reflect on these 2 questions. So think of times when you've received helpful feedback on, say, schoolwork, a hobby, or if you play sports. What makes good feedback and what makes bad feedback? So at this point, you'd want to go back to your Pear Deck screen and write a response. So what makes good feedback and what makes bad feedback? All right, I'll give you another 30 seconds to finish up your thoughts. Yeah, definitely, Jorge. Yeah, for sure. All right, so I know you all are still typing, but I'm going to show some of the responses. I see a lot of really thoughtful responses. So someone pointed out that good feedback should start with the positives first. So, start with a compliment, start with what, is working. Sometimes it could be really hard to find the positives, but it's really important that you start off with that. Um, and then tell the person, kindly, softly, what are some points that they could improve upon. So offer suggestions. Then bad feedback, harsh, straight to the point insults with no regard for your feelings, and it's just not helpful, right? It's the point of bad feedback is to just be completely negative and unhelpful. Someone else used the phrase constructive criticism, right? Something that's actually helpful. Um, yes, that's a good example of bad feedback, Jorge. Thank you. So points that support your activity or help improve your performance in an activity. Bad feedback is nonsensical information that just doesn't help in any way. So yeah, a lot of you just kind of touch on like bad feedback is not helpful. It's just completely negative. Doesn't really have any regard for the person's the creator themselves, right? Because it does, even if something lacks polish or could be greatly improved upon, the person did put effort and a part of themselves in it, and so you have to consider that. I like this other part where this last one I have here. Bad feedback would be basing your feedback on personal preference. So you have to keep in mind that, it's not all about you. You might be one user, but you can't please everyone, right? So you'll see a lot of people, complaining about, new games that get released because it doesn't, fit their schema of what the perfect game should be. But the reality is that the game was not created for them. It was created for, the vast majority of people that actually enjoy it. But yeah, insulting without giving ideas. So you see a lot of that on the internet as well as like, oh, this game sucks. But it's like, okay, well, why don't you try making one if it's so easy? Good feedback would be giving ideas on what could be improved. Yeah. These are all very, very, yes, Chrono Trigger. These are all very, very thoughtful. Yes. So in the future, we will be entering this testing and feedback phase. So it's very important that we think back on what is good feedback and what is bad feedback. Unfortunately, we don't have time to do that with this particular project. Okay, so let's move along here. So after receiving feedback, you would usually take that feedback and then pick a couple of things to improve upon, and then you would go back and implement those changes. So in another cycle of development. So you would pick those improvements, you would fill that out on your planning guide, and then get back to work in the development stage of your application. Okay, so one more question or another set of questions. Why is it important to get feedback from others while building your app? So I know we're not doing it this time around, but think about why it might be important to get feedback from others. In particular, others who might be your target audience that will use your application. And then what is the value of getting this feedback, even if you're not finished with your app? Why might it be important? All right, so I know a lot of you are still writing. Please continue to do that. I'm just going to display a few different answers here. Show our responses. Okay, so a lot of you pointed out that getting outside feedback allows you to see through other people's eyes, right? When you're developing an application, you get so used to looking at it and using it that like It may be super intuitive for you how it works and how to actually navigate through the application, but as soon as you give it to another person, it might not be so obvious, and so you'll get to see how other people might actually, interact with it from another person's perspective. Um, you might have intended the user to use it in one way, and then you give it to someone, and then they use it in a completely different way, in an unexpected way, and you have to kind of rethink about how your application is designed. Let's see. Even if your app isn't finished, feedback during the development phase is valuable because you can help improve previous elements or mechanics. Yeah, definitely. You don't want to get so far into development that you can't go back. It would be like such a huge effort to scrap everything and start from the beginning. So it's super important in the real world to always be involving your user at each stage, because then you can get feedback before you start going down one path that the user just totally didn't want. Um, so it's really, really important that even if you're not done, you're getting feedback from your users. And then someone else pointed out, yeah, if it's broken early on, you will have to recode everything you've built that is based on the original broken code. And then you could also find a new idea or concept to include that's easier to introduce if you do it sooner rather than later. Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying. So it's better to catch, mistakes or misconceptions. Like maybe you got an idea that the user wanted one thing, but they really meant something else. So doing user testing uh, and getting feedback early and often is really key when you're developing apps and software. Yeah, really good, thoughtful responses here. Thank you. Okay. So the next stage, the last lesson of this is the assessment day. So I've decided rather than um, just unlocking the assessment and having you just do it for homework, we could just spend class time so we don't have to worry about it. We don't have to worry about people getting locked out. Now, say you need more than class time to complete it, that's totally fine. It's just that I'll unlock it during class. And if you need more time, you could have, it's open for 24 hours. But this way, I think we'll get a better completion rate, make sure that everyone gets it done. So on Friday, you can expect to take our assessment, and it'll be found on code.org. Right now it's locked, so you don't see it. But for the last bit of class, I thought we could prepare for the exam with our quizzes. Let's pull that up. So you don't have to be in Pear Deck anymore. You can close that out if you want.